Hey everyone, hope everyone's having a great now. Such a silly phrase, but it makes sense, because this is it. But anyway, one thing that came to mind was this whole notion of spirituality and what it really means, and what it's supposed to do, and what we've sort of turned it into. I turned spirituality into a sort of comfort blanket, like a child's toy that I just kind of had with me, and it made me feel all better and cozy sometimes. But it got dirty, I carried that blanket around and it just accumulated all kinds of dirt, and then eventually it just made me sick because it was contaminated. So most spiritual practices, and well, all really, let's be serious here, spirituality is just a lie, really. The way we've constructed it, the fact that we can turn it into something makes it into a big lie. I think MrMWThielmann said that spirituality isn't child's play. My words will tear you apart. So that's kind of more along, more along the lines of not what it should be, but the intention behind, you could say, the pointers, and not even intention really, but you could say the power of that sort of dialogue, of that aliveness. The aliveness that gives rise to these pointers does literally tear the notion of an entity apart. But of course, the you that's being torn apart isn't actually what you are, so rather than feeling safe, it gets rid of the one who feels as though they need to be safe, and what's left is just, you could say it's the safety of oneness, because there's no other. But there's no longer a seemingly vulnerable individual trying to become safe, which is of course the intention of religion and those cushy spiritualities. There is a vulnerable individual, and we can make him or her feel better by giving them a practice, having them attain levels so they feel like they're getting somewhere. But of course, does that really get to the root? That's the question. I don't mean to be dissing these sort of practices or ways of thinking. They just didn't work for me. What seemed to work was the ruthless honesty and the investigation into the matter, which did feel like being torn apart at times. And yet what I am has never moved, or has never been an object to be subjected to being torn apart. You could say that this aliveness is always in the background, watching as this imaginary crazy entity tries this, that, and the other. But nothing needs to happen, because there isn't really that entity happening. So that's all this is about, really. It's addressing that the core identity issue has been taken on board. The issue of that identity is that it's false. So we immediately can see that, well, we do exist, but we can't put our finger on an object. So all we find is this aliveness, this presence that's vibrant. And that's all we need, really. It's not all we need. It's just all there is. You could say that's all we need to consider in terms of spirituality, that it has to be pointing to what's real and present, rather than going into all these sort of merry-go-round side issues. You could throw that away. Or not. I mean, if that's enjoyable, it's enjoyable. But for the purposes of getting to the bottom of our identity crisis, I would say, yeah, I mean, what I had to do was throw everything away and see what was left. It's just this presence, really. I mean, that's all. It's not even all that I could find, because even that I is it. So this is very, very radical in a certain sense, because it totally dismantles everything. It leaves only what's left. It leaves only the aliveness. So, if people want a nice spirituality that seems to cater to their specific needs, imaginary needs, and make them feel better, then that's what they'll look for. That's what I looked for a good few years. And then I got tired of pretending as this entity. And so I started looking into this ruthless sort of spirituality. And I found that it was very challenging and yet very simple. So I could look and see that, oh yeah, what I am is this presence. And then look and say, well, see that I'm not this entity. And just resolve the issue just by being very intent on it. And not have to go back into concepts. So that's the power of this. And that's the fear that can also happen around this. Because it feels like dying, maybe. The only question is, who am I that's aware of me dying? So this presence is aware that I feel like I'm dying. So how much self can that imagined entity really be? How much of me can that be? I must always be this presence. This presence is more me, than the me that I've constructed in imagination. So there's nothing wrong, nothing happens. It's not like a threat to what we are, it's just a threat to what we're not. So that's all this is. It's just that subtle, simple clarification of identity. I'm this presence, so is everything else. And we can verify that directly. So there's no need to take anyone's word for it, including mine, as I've said before. So it's all repetitive. This is all lather, rinse, repeat, you know? We're trying to wash out all this stuff, and it seems like repetition may be helpful. But what we are doesn't need repetition because it's always new anyway. So it's not stuck in these same thoughts, same old concepts. What we are is the freshness that's here. So just seeing that is simple. So anyway, thanks a lot and all the best.